Well, joining us live from Washington, D.C. to talk to us about Mr. Bannon's departure is political analyst and journalist Oren Kessler. Mr. Kessler, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Firstly, so what do you make of the timing of his departure?
Well, it's quite interesting timing. This is something that the pundits have been predicting for quite some time, some weeks and months, Mr. Bannon's departure. I think it's hard to avoid the conclusion that his departure may indeed have something to do with the arrival of General Kelly as Chief of Staff at the White House.
So why do you think the exit has been timed in this manner? I mean, it was the rumours are he was scheduled to be fired weeks ago.
Well, according to Bannon's own account, he apparently reached an agreement with General Kelly, with the White House Chief of Staff, 11 days ago on August 7th that he would leave. But in terms of why this is happening right now, the thing that jumps out to me again is the fact that General Kelly has just arrived, and indeed this furor that we've seen over the past few days over what happened in Charlottesville. I think President Trump's daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared, who's of course a senior advisor, have been pushing the president to push Bannon out for some time. And I think what we've seen over the past few days, the controversy that Trump has stepped into, has perhaps caused them to push the president even harder to push out Bannon.
So will this departure remove a source of friction in the White House? Will this make for a happier camp for those who are remaining?
So this will certainly please Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. It'll also please General McMaster, H.R. McMaster, of course, a national security advisor, and indeed Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. These are people, particularly Mattis and McMaster, who follow a rather traditional foreign policy, the kind of foreign policy that Mr. Bannon was very much against. He would deride privately, by all accounts, Bannon would deride McMaster and Mattis as sort of neoconservatives, as interventionists, not the true America firsters that he would like to see holding the reins. So there were those two power centers of Bannon, Stephen Miller, Sebastian Gorka on the one hand, the sort of Breitbart or Bannon-Bart they were called, as opposed to, or set against, Mattis, McMaster, and the more traditional figures there. So I think the Breitbart wing is now diminished in the White House. On the other hand, now they've got Mr. Bannon back where he began at Breitbart, and I think this sort of back channel between Breitbart and the White House is going to continue now that Bannon is back where he started at Breitbart.
OK, we'll talk about Breitbart in a moment, but talking about his time in office, I mean, what sort of influence do you think Mr. Bannon had on Donald Trump?
I think he had tremendous influence. I think reportedly it was Bannon and Stephen Miller who wrote that inauguration speech that caught so many people here in Washington off guard with its images of, quote, American carnage, and just quite a negative and bleak speech, as opposed to most inauguration speeches which aim to be uplifting and inspiring. Bannon was behind the travel ban, also known by some as the Muslim ban. He's been behind, and he's really been pushing Trump to be defiant, to be combative, whereas McMaster and Mattis and others have encouraged him to follow a more conciliatory and traditional line. I think Bannon revels in the controversy that Trump has caused, and indeed, during this furor over Charlottesville, Bannon was positively loving it, and he said as much in interviews to the media.
So at Breitbart, do you see a direction of travel there over their news agenda?
Look, I don't particularly see a change coming in Breitbart's coverage. What we have seen is Breitbart going after McMaster quite fiercely, and indeed going after Gary Cohn, Trump's economic advisor, berating him as, quote, a globalist. And I think this sort of thing will continue. I don't expect Breitbart to now become extremely critical of President Trump. What I do expect is for them to continue and perhaps even double down on these targets within the White House that Breitbart has decided have to go, particularly Mr. McMaster.
Just finally, briefly, is he expected to use his position as a platform to blast those within the White House?
I do think so, absolutely. I think there is going to be a lot of cooperation ongoing between Breitbart and the White House. And I think, as mentioned, Mr. McMaster and Mr. Cohn, and indeed Jared Kushner and others who Bannon did not get along with in the White House, I think will be targeted all the more so. I mean, Bannon today, after his departure, gave a very aggressive, combative speech to a conservative magazine here, in which he said he's ready to go, he's revved up, he's feeling thermonuclear. This is not a guy who is now going to ride off into the sunset. He's very much viewing this as sort of a new beginning for him. The country knows who he is. He's had, however, roughly 7-8 months in the White House to advance these agendas. And now he's going to continue that fight from Breitbart.
OK, Mr. Kessler, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.